Continuing chapter 8, page 43, at the bottom, the last sentence. Your wife is quite lovely, so doll-like and inscrutable. Who bit half a chocolate bar? He had enough problems with an empty restaurant, a lazy son, and his nagging ulcer. Now he had to put up with this bigot. Grace lit another cigarette and rearranged the clues to read Purple Waves. You heard that doorman say Purple Waves. It must mean something. And that ghastly secretary was wearing a dress with purple waves last night. Not to mention her crutch. You should not speak unkindly of those less fortunate than you, Who said. You're quite right, Grace replied. I thought the poor thing handled her infirmity with great courage, traveling mimosa. My future son-in-law says he's a doctor, Anyhow, Pulaski couldn't possibly be the murderer, not the way she gimps around. Besides, how could my Uncle Sam know she'd wear purple waves to his funeral? Who waved the cigarette smoke from his face? The murderer had to have motive. How about this? A niece murders her rich uncle to inherit his money. Good sport that she was. Grace tossed back her head and uttered an amused Not that I care, Who said. That cheating moneybags got what he deserved. What's the matter? Look, Grace pointed to the clues. Fruited, purple, waves, 4C. For C, the murderer lives in apartment 4C. I live in 4C, Who barked. If Sam Westing wanted to say 4C, he would have written the number 4 and the letter C. C means sea, like what a turtle swims in. Come now, Mr. Who, we are both being silly. Have you spoken to your son about his clues? Some son. If you can catch him, you can ask him who stuffed the rest of his candy bar in his mouth. And some business I've got here. Everybody orders up. Nobody orders down. The coffee shop is sending me to the poorhouse. And your Angela and that Pulaski woman, they didn't show us the will. They didn't give us their clues. They didn't pay for 3 cups of jasmine tea and 6 almond cookies. And you smoke too much. And you eat too much. Grace threw her coin purse on the table and stormed out of the restaurant. Change? That's all he'll get from her. He'd have to beg on his knees before she'd sign Grace Windsor Wexler on a $10,000 check. That madman. Some pair they made. Attila the Hun and Gracie the Useless. Gracie Windkoppel Wexler. Heir, pretender, pretentious heir. First, the money, they signed their names to the check. Half would go into Doug Who's savings account. Half would go into Theo's parents. Next clues. His, in, on, the 4. Maybe their numbers. 1, 2, 3, 4, Theo guessed. I still say on is no. The bored track star said. He clasped his hands behind his head, leaned back in the coffee shop booth, and stretched his long legs under the opposite bench. And no is what we got. No real clues, no leads, no will. After 3 cups of coffee, 2 pastries, and a bowl of rice pudding with cream, Sidel Pulaski had offered nothing in return. Theo refused to give up. Are you sure you didn't see anything unusual at the Westing house that night? I didn't kill Westing, if that's what you mean. And the only unusual thing I saw was Turtle Wexler. I think the pest is madly in love with me. How's that for luck? Get serious, Doug. One of the heirs is a murderer. We could all get killed. Just because somebody zapped the old man doesn't mean he's going to kill again, Dad says. Doug paused. His father's comment about awarding a medal to the murderer might be incriminating. Theo tried another trap. I was playing chess with somebody in the game room last night. Who? That's what's strange. I do not know who. We'll have to find out which one of the heirs plays chess. Since when is chess playing evidence for murder? Well, it's something to go on, Theo replied. And another thing, the will said no 2 sets of clues are alike. Maybe all the clues put together make one message, a message that points to the murderer. Somehow or other, we'll have to get the heirs to pool the clues. Oh, sure, the killer can't wait to hand over the clues that will hang him, Doug rose. Snowbound or not, he had to stay in shape for the track meet. For the rest of the day, he jogged through the hallway and up and down the stairs, scaring the nervous tenants half out of their wits. Judge J.J. Ford had no doubt that the clues she shared with the doorman were meant for her, but Sam Westing could toss off sharper insults than "Skies am shining, brother." His choice of words must have been limited. Therefore, these clues were part of a longer statement, a statement that named a name, the name of the murderer. No, Westing could have not been murdered. If his life had been threatened, if he had been in danger of any kind, he would have insisted on the police protection. He owned the police. He owned the whole town. Sam Westing was not the type to let himself get killed, not unless he was insane. The judge opened the envelope given by the incompetent Plum, a certificate of sanity dated last week. Having thoroughly examined, keen mind and memory, excellent physical condition, signed Sidney Sykes, MD. Sykes, that sounded familiar. The judge scanned the obituary she had cut from Saturday's newspaper. Samuel Westing and his friend, Dr. Sidney Sykes, were involved in a near-fatal automobile accident. Both men were hospitalized with severe injuries. Sykes resumed his Westingtown medical practice and the post of county coroner, but Westing disappeared from sight. Sykes was Westing's friend, and she remembered a witness to the will. But he was also a physician in good standing. She would accept his opinion on Westing's insanity, for the time being at least. Back to the clues. Look at her, the big-time judge, fussing over scraps of Westing's super-strength paper towels. Forget the clues, she said aloud, rising from her desk to putter about the room. Nibbling on a macaroon, she stacked the used coffee cups on a tray. If only that Pulaski person had let her study the will. That's where the real clues were buried. Among the veiled threats and pompous promises, the slogans and silliness in the hodgepodge of a will. In his will, Sam Westing implied, he did not state, he implied, that he was murdered. One, he was murdered. Two, the murderer was one of the heirs. 3, he alone knew the name of the murderer. And 4, the name of the murderer was on the answer to the game. The game, a tricky, divisively Westing game. No matter how much fear and suspicion he instilled in the players, Sam Westing knew that greed would keep them playing the game. Until the murderer was captured and punished, Sam Westing was not murdered, but one of his heirs was guilty of some offense against the relentless man, and that heir was in danger. From his grave, Westing would stalk his enemy, and through his heirs, he would wreak his revenge. Which one? Which heir was the target of Westing's vindictiveness? In the game of justice, she would have to find Westing's victim before the others did. She would have to learn everything she could about each one of the heirs, who they are, and how their lives touch Westing's. These 16 strangers whose only connection with one another was Sunset Towers. Sunset Towers, she'd start from there. Good, the telephones are working again. The number she dialed was answered on the first ring. Hi there, this is a recording of yours truly, Barney Northup. I'm at your service, soon as I get back to my office, that is. Just sing out your problem to old Barney here when you hear the beep. Beep! J.J. Ford hung up without singing out her problem to old Barney. He, too, could be involved in Westing's plot. The newspaper, she would try the newspaper. Surely someone was snowbound there. After 8 rings, a live voice answered. We usually don't supply that kind of information over the phone, but since it's you, Judge Ford, I'll be happy to oblige. Just spell out the names, and I'll call back if I find anything. Thank you. I'd appreciate it. It was a beginning. Sam Westing was dead, but maybe just once she could beat him at his own game, his last game. Having found what she wanted in Turtle's desk, Angela returned to her frilly bedroom where Sidel Pulaski, glasses low on her nose, was perched on a ruffled stool at the vanity table, smearing blue shadow on her eyelids. First, we tackle our own clues, the secretary did, frowning at the result in the threefold mirror. Unlucky from the day she was born, she now had a beautiful, well-loved partner. There was always a chance that they alone had been given the answer. She unsealed the envelope and hid it and held it out to Angela. Take one. Angela removed the first clue. Good. Now it was Sidel's turn. Glory be, she exclaimed, thinking she had the name of the murderer. Her thumb was covering the letter D. The word was hood. Angela's turn. The third clue was from. Sidel's turn. The fourth clue was spacious. The fifth and last clue was Angela uttered a low moan. Her hand shook as she passed the paper to her partner. The fifth and last clue was Grace. Grace, that's your mother's name, isn't it? Sidel said. Well, don't worry. That clue doesn't mean your mother is a murderer. The will says it is not what you have, it's what you don't have that counts. The secretary had not yet transcribed the shorthand, but she had read it through several times before, hiding the notebook in a safe place. By the way, are you really related to Mr. Westing? Angela shrugged. Sidel assumed that meant no and turned to the clues. Good. Grace from Hood Spacious. The only thing I can figure from these clues is good gracious from Hood Space. As soon as the parking lot is shoveled out, we'll peek under the hoods of all cars. A map or more clues may have been hidden there. Maybe even the murder weapon. Now let's hear about the other clues. Angela reported on the clues gathered in the game room, and during the day's comings and goings, Queen Otis Amber said, King Otis and Queen Crow, Purple Waves. Mother switched two clues around when Sandy mentioned those words. On or no, Doug and Theo could not decide whether that clue was right side up or upside down. Grains, Chris Theodorakis, thinks that clue refers to Otis Amber. You know, grains, oats. MT, Angela showed her partner the crumpled scrap of paper she had picked up along with Sidel's dropped crutch during Flora Bombach's tea party. 500 MT at $6 equals $3,000. Broker's commission plus 90 equals $3,090. I checked Turtle's diary. She is not following any stock with the symbol like MT, so it must be one of her clues. MT could stand for either mountain or empty. Excellent, Sidel Pulaski remarked. Her partner was beautiful, but not dumb. Read all the clues together now. Good, hood from Spacious Grace, King, Queen, Purple Waves. On or no, grains, mountain or empty. Sidel was disappointed. It is not what you have, it's what you don't have that counts. And what we don't have is a verb. Nothing makes sense without a verb. What about the judge? Judge Ford thought her clues were an insult. And she said something about playing a pawn in Westing's game. And she had a clipping of the obituary on her desk. This obituary? Angela handed Sidel the newspaper taken from Turtle's drawer. What's that? It was the knock on the door. It was footsteps in the living room. It was Theo. Anyone for a game of chess, he asked, leaning through the bedroom doorway. No, thank you, Sidel replied, looking very busy. Theo smiled shyly at Angela and left. Sidel read the obituary in Turtle's newspaper. The words $200 million were underlined, but she found a more interesting item. Sam Westing was a master at chess. No wonder Theo's so interested. Do you know anything about the game, Angela? A little, she replied slowly, putting the pieces in order. The judge says she's a pawn, and Otis Amber says he's the king. Crow's the queen. Oh well, it's probably just a coincidence. We can't leave any stone unturned. Sidel insisted, as the will says, object of the game to win. What did you say? Object of the game to win? How about object of the game, twin? Maybe the murderer is a twin. Twin? Sidel liked that. The only problem would be getting the murderer to admit that he or she is a twin. Let's get back to my apartment. It's time to transcribe those notes. Angela helped the invalid to her feet and nervously peered in both directions before stepping into the hallway. Sidel clucked at her timidity. There's nothing to be scared of, Angela. Westing was murdered for his money, and we're not rich yet. We won't be rich enough to be murdered until we find the name. By the time we get the money from the estate, the murderer will be locked up in jail. In spite of the impeccable logic, Angela looked back over her shoulder several times on the way to 3C. Strange. Sidel stood before her open apartment door. She had slammed it shut on leaving, but had not locked the deadbolt. After all, not even a burglar could get into a snowbound building unless. Angela, too frightened to notice that Sidel ran through the apartment with her crutch in the air, found her partner in the bathroom frantically tossing soiled towels from the hamper. Sidel Pulaski stared at the bare wicker bottom, then sank to the rim of the bathtub, shaking her head in disbelief. Someone in Sunset Towers had stolen the shorthand notebook.